The day I discovered my husband's secret life through a bank statement notification was also the day I realized I'd been living in a carefully constructed lie. James had told me he needed space and moved into what he called his flat 3 months ago. What he didn't know was that the inheritance money he'd stolen from me, money my grandmother had left specifically to help me start the family I desperately wanted, had triggered an automatic alert when it was used as a down payment on a luxury condo. His condo, purchased through a shell company I'd never heard of. As I sat in my car across from his building that first day, watching him escort his young secretary inside, I didn't confront him. I didn't scream, instead I smiled. Because sometimes revenge isn't about explosive confrontations. Sometimes it's about patience, strategy, and knowing exactly when to step back and let someone's own actions destroy them. I met James Harrington at a charity gala 6 years ago. I was working as an event coordinator and he was a rising star at Meridian Financial Partners. He had that confident smile that seemed genuine, eyes that appeared to look right through social pretense, and a way of making me feel like I was the only person in a crowded room. When he proposed 11 months later, I thought I'd found everything I'd ever wanted. "Carolyn," he'd said, down on one knee in the same ballroom where we'd met, "you're the stability I've never had, the home I've always wanted. Marry me?" I remember how my hands trembled as he slipped the ring on my finger. How could I have known that stability was code for financial security and home meant access to your family's money? The first 3 years were good, at least I thought they were. We bought a modest house in a neighborhood with good schools, planning for the children we both said we wanted. James worked long hours, but I understood. Partnership at his firm required sacrifice. I focused on building my event planning business, creating a flexible career that would accommodate a family. When my grandmother Martha passed away last year, I was devastated. She'd raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 7. She was my rock, my compass. The inheritance she left me wasn't enormous, $350,000, but it represented her entire life savings. She'd specifically written in her will that it was for Caroline's future children's education and well-being. "This is amazing," James had said, holding me as I cried after the reading of the will. "Martha's still taking care of you, even now." What he meant was that Martha was now taking care of him. The changes were subtle at first. James suggested combining our accounts for tax purposes. He recommended investing the inheritance money to maximize returns before we need it for the kids. He started staying later at the office, coming home smelling of expensive cologne I hadn't bought him. There were weekend conferences that hadn't appeared on his work calendar, which I accidentally glimpsed when dropping off the lunch he'd forgotten one day. Then came the argument that changed everything. "I'm not ready for children yet," he announced one night over the dinner I'd prepared to discuss starting fertility treatments. "The market is volatile. My position at the firm isn't secure enough." "But we've been planning this for years," I said, the pasta growing cold between us. "I'm 34, James. We can't wait forever." "I need you to trust me on this," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Just another year or two." 2 weeks later, he told me he needed space. He claimed our marriage was suffocating him, that he couldn't think clearly living under the same roof. "I'll be staying at Mark's place for a while," he said, packing a suitcase while I stood frozen in the doorway of our bedroom. "His roommate moved out, and he has an extra room. I've already arranged it." Mark was a colleague I'd met exactly twice. The arrangement made no sense, but I was too shocked to question it. James had never mentioned any problems until suddenly our marriage was apparently on life support. A month into our separation, I noticed unusual bank activity, large sums moving between accounts. When I questioned James during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations, he explained it was work bonuses being deposited and investment transfers, all perfectly normal. "Don't worry about the finances," he'd said with a hint of condescension. "I'm making sure everything's taken care of." I might have believed him if I hadn't received that automatic notification from my grandmother's bank. The one account James didn't know I still maintained separately. The alert informed me that the trust fund had been emptied, with the funds transferred to an LLC called Horizon Holdings. It took 3 days of research to discover that Horizon Holdings had purchased a luxury condo at the Westerly, one of the most exclusive buildings in the city. It took another day of sitting in my car across the street to see James walk through those gleaming doors, key fob in hand, his secretary Emily giggling at his side. The doorman tipped his hat to them, not as visitors, as residents. I felt as though I'd been plunged into ice water. My hands shook so badly I couldn't put the key in the ignition for nearly 20 minutes. How long had this been going on? Was she the reason he suddenly needed space? Or was she just a convenient bonus to the new life he was building with my inheritance? That night, alone in what had once been our bed, I cried until there were no tears left. Then, in that strange calm that comes after emotional storms, I began to think clearly for the first time in months. James had been gaslighting me, making me believe I was pushing too hard for a family, that our financial situation was too precarious. All while he was planning his exit, funded by the money my grandmother had saved her entire life to give to her great-grandchildren who now might never exist. The next morning, I didn't call a divorce lawyer. Not yet. Instead, I put on my most expensive outfit, a cream-colored suit I'd worn to networking events, styled my hair, applied careful makeup, and drove to the Westerly. "Good morning," I said to the doorman, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying temples. His nameplate read Thomas. "I'm thinking of moving into the building and wondered if I could get some information about the amenities." Thomas smiled, clearly recognizing a potential resident. "Of course, ma'am. Would you like me to call the leasing office?" "Actually," I said, lowering my voice confidentially, "I'd prefer to get the real scoop first. Management always paints a rosy picture, but I'd value an honest opinion from someone who sees everything." His smile turned genuine. "Smart approach. Tell you what, my break is in 15 minutes. There's a coffee shop around the corner." Over coffee that I insisted on buying, Thomas gave me honest insights about the building management and residents. I listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and by the end of his break, I'd made my first ally. "You know," I said as we walked back, "I really appreciate your time." "I'm Caroline, by the way." "Thomas Miller," he replied, shaking my hand. "And honestly, the building could use more residents like you. Too many entitled types who barely acknowledge we exist." I smiled, thinking of James and his dismissive attitude toward service workers. "Well, that's not me. I believe everyone deserves respect." "Refreshing attitude," Thomas said. "Stop by any time if you have more questions." I did stop by the next day, and the day after that, each time with coffee for Thomas and more questions about the building. I learned about the security systems, the package delivery protocols, and gradually about the residents themselves. "That new couple in 1502, I mentioned casually on my 4th visit. "They moved in recently, right?" Thomas nodded. "About 2 months ago. Man and his wife, I think, though." He hesitated. "The what?" I prompted. "Well, it's not my business, but the gentleman often brings in another woman. Young blonde. They don't exactly act like colleagues, if you know what I mean." I kept my face neutral despite the knife twisting in my gut. "Interesting. The real estate market really attracts all types, doesn't it?" By the end of 2 weeks, Thomas and I had developed a genuine friendship. I learned about his daughter in college, his dreams of retiring to North Carolina, his late wife. He learned about my event planning business, my love of gardening, my childhood raised by my grandmother. What he didn't learn yet was my connection to the resident in 1502. 3 weeks into my reconnaissance, I was sitting with Thomas in the lobby during his break when he mentioned casually, "Your friend in 1502 is having his parents' visit next weekend." I nearly choked on my coffee. "My friend?" Thomas looked confused. "Mr. Harrington. Aren't you friends? You ask about him often enough?" I just assumed. My mind raced. Thomas had noticed my interest in James. I needed to pivot quickly. "Oh, James," I said, feigning casual recognition. "We're not exactly friends. More like, we have history." Thomas raised an eyebrow, his expression changing to one of concern. "The bad kind of history?" I hesitated, then decided a version of the truth might serve me better than continued deception. "He's my husband. Actually, at least legally. He told me he was staying at a friend's place while we worked through some issues. I had no idea he'd bought a condo." Thomas's face darkened. "With the blonde?" I nodded, fighting back hairs that weren't entirely manufactured. "I found out accidentally. I haven't confronted him yet because, well, I'm still processing it all." Thomas sat back, visibly angry on my behalf. "I've seen this before in this building. Rich guys thinking they can just discard people and start over. It's not right." "No," I agreed quietly, "it's not." After a moment of silence, Thomas leaned forward. "His parents are coming this weekend. They called to arrange parking. Seem like nice people. Asked me about local restaurants, whether their son was settling in well." I looked up, a plan beginning to form. "They don't know, do they? About the separation? About her?" Thomas shook his head. "From how they talked, I'd say no." "Thomas," I said slowly, "I think I need a favor." The rest of the week passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. I learned from Thomas that James's parents were arriving Saturday morning. James had apparently told them to meet him at a restaurant downtown, planning to bring them to the condo afterward. His secretary wouldn't be there. She had a weekend trip planned with friends. Saturday morning, I dressed carefully in the blue dress his mother had once complimented, applied natural-looking makeup, and arrived at the Westerly an hour before his parents were due. They just called from the airport, Thomas confirmed, looking almost as nervous as I felt. Flight arrived early. They're coming straight here instead of meeting him later. And you sure about this? I asked. I don't want to put your job at risk. Thomas straightened his uniform jacket. Mrs. Harrington, some things are more important than a job. Decency is one of them. When Robert and Margaret Harrington arrived at the Westerly, Thomas greeted them warmly, taking their luggage. Mr. Harrington isn't expecting you for a few hours, he explained. But I can take you right up to 1,502nd. I'm sure he'll be delighted by the surprise. Oh, we don't want to impose, Margaret said, looking uncertain. Nonsense, Thomas assured her. Residents here value our personalized service. Mr. Harrington gave me explicit instructions to always accommodate his family. He speaks of you both often. That settled it. Thomas escorted them to the elevator, using his master key to send them directly to the 15th floor. I waited in the lobby, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. 27 minutes later, I counted every second the elevator doors opened. Margaret Harrington emerged first, her face ashen, eyes red-rimmed. Robert followed, his arm around his wife, his expression thunderous. When Margaret saw me, she stopped abruptly. Caroline? I stood, smoothing my dress. Hello, Margaret. Robert. I'm so sorry to ambush you like this. You know? Robert asked, his voice tight with anger. About all of this? Not until recently, I admitted. James told me he was staying with a colleague while we worked on our marriage. I only discovered the truth 3 weeks ago. Margaret broke away from her husband and embraced me, her body shaking with silent sobs. When she pulled back, her eyes were filled with a mixture of grief and rage. We raised a monster, she whispered. My own son. How could he do this to you, to us? Lying to everyone, flaunting that woman in the home he should have been building with you. Robert placed a hand on his wife's shoulder. We saw everything, walked in on them, together. The condo full of new furniture, expensive art. When I demanded to know what was going on, he couldn't even look me in the eye, just kept saying it wasn't what it looked like. He said he'd explain everything at dinner, Margaret added bitterly, as if there could be any explanation. Thomas, who had escorted them back down, stood respectfully to the side. I caught his eye and mouthed, thank you. I have a car waiting. I told James's parents. Perhaps we could go somewhere and talk? As we left the building, I glanced back once. Thomas gave me a small nod of solidarity. And somewhere 15 floors above us, James Harrington was frantically trying to salvage a web of lies that had just spectacularly collapsed. Over lunch at a quiet restaurant across town, I finally told Margaret and Robert everything: the inheritance, the separate account, the shell company, the gaslighting about our finances, his sudden reluctance to start a family. $350,000, Robert repeated, his voice hollow. Your grandmother's life savings, meant for her great-grandchildren's education, I confirmed. Children James suddenly decided we shouldn't have right after the money was in his control. Margaret reached across the table for my hand. We raised him better than this. I don't understand what happened to him. Power and money change people, I said gently. Or maybe they just reveal who they truly are. What will you do now? Robert asked. I took a deep breath. I haven't decided yet. Part of me wanted to confirm what was happening before I made any moves. You need a good lawyer, Robert said firmly. I know several. The best. Robert, Margaret interjected. This is our son we're talking about. And this is our daughter-in-law, he countered, who has been betrayed in the worst possible way. By our son. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. He's left the building. Looked upset. Asked if his parents had been here. Shortly after, the calls from James began. First to his parents, who let them go to voicemail, then to me. I excused myself to answer on the third attempt. Caroline James's voice was frantic. Where are my parents? Are they with you? Hello, James, I said calmly. Yes, they're with me. We're having a lovely lunch. What have you told them? His voice cracked with panic. Nothing they didn't already see for themselves, I replied. Although we have been discussing the inheritance money you stole to buy your love nest. Silence. Then I can explain everything. It's not what it looks like. It never is it? I said. Your explanation can wait for another day. Right now, your parents need time to process the fact that their son is both an adulterer and a thief. Caroline, goodbye. James. I returned to the table where Margaret and Robert sat in pained silence. He sounds desperate, I told them, as he should be. The next week passed in a whirlwind. James called constantly, me, his parents, even my friends, trying to control the narrative. His story evolved from outright denial to convoluted justifications. The money was an investment for our future. Emily was just a friend helping him decorate. He needed space to realize how much he truly loved me. I didn't engage. Instead, I met with 3 different divorce attorneys, documented every financial transaction of the past year, and began the process of freezing our joint assets. Robert, true to his word, connected me with a brilliant financial forensic specialist who began tracing exactly where my inheritance had gone. 10 days after the confrontation at the Westerly, James appeared at my door unannounced. Please, he said, looking disheveled and exhausted. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Against my better judgment, I let him in. He'd lost weight. His usually immaculate appearance was noticeably neglected. Wrinkled shirt, stubbled face, dark circles under his eyes. Emily's gone, he said immediately. I ended it. It was a mistake. Caroline, the biggest mistake of my life. Which part? I asked coldly. Sleeping with her or stealing my inheritance? He winced. I didn't steal it. I was investing it for us. The condo is an appreciating asset in a prime location. An asset you put in a shell company's name, not mine. Not ours. Tax purposes, he insisted. Corporate liability protection. I was going to surprise you once the market timing was right. I laughed without humor. Surprise me? With what? The revelation that you'd been living a double life? I got lost, he admitted, dropping onto the couch. The pressure at work. The expectations. I made terrible choices. But I want to make it right. I'll sign the condo over to you. I'll do whatever it takes. For a brief, weak moment, I remembered the man I thought I'd married. The charming, attentive partner who had once seemed so perfect. But that man had never existed. Why the sudden change of heart, James? Is it because your parents now know who you really are? Because Emily left once she realized you might not be the wealthy bachelor she thought? Or because my lawyers are about to uncover every financial move you've made with my money? He looked up, and I saw something calculating behind the performance of remorse. I still love you, Caroline. We can start over. Have the family we always wanted. The family you suddenly decided wasn't financially feasible right after you started draining my inheritance? I was wrong, he insisted. I see that now. I sat across from him, studying the man who had once been the center of my world. I need time to think. I said finally, this is all so sudden. Hope flickered in his eyes, of course. Take all the time you need. I'll be staying with my parents while I sort things out with the condo. They're still upset, but their family. After he left, I called Margaret. He just left, I told her. Said he's staying with you. Her short, bitter laugh confirmed what I'd already suspected. We haven't spoken to him since that day at the restaurant. Robert made it clear James isn't welcome in our home until he makes full restitution to you. I thought as much, I said. Thank you for confirming. Caroline, she said hesitantly, whatever you decide about your marriage, please know that Robert and I consider you family. That won't change. Those words meant more than she could know. 2 days later, the financial forensic specialist delivered his preliminary report. The news was worse than I'd imagined. James hadn't just used my inheritance for the condo down payment. He'd been systematically siphoning money from our joint accounts for over a year, funneling it through Horizon Holdings into other shell companies. The total approached $500,000, my entire inheritance plus a significant portion of our joint savings. More devastating was the discovery of emails between James and Emily dating back 18 months. Their relationship had begun long before his sudden need for space. There were discussions about their future together, about investments they were making as a couple with my money. Armed with this information, I made an appointment with the most aggressive divorce attorney on my list. Then I texted James, I've thought about what you said. Maybe you're right about starting over. Can we meet at the condo tomorrow, 7 p.m.? His reply came immediately, absolutely. Thank you for giving me this chance. The next evening, I arrived at the Westerly at exactly 7 p.m., wearing a recording device recommended by my attorney. Thomas, now fully briefed on the situation, gave me a supportive nod as I entered. He arrived about an hour ago, Thomas informed me, carrying groceries and flowers. Thank you for everything, Thomas, I said sincerely. Just doing what's right, Mrs. Harrington. James opened the door with a practiced look of contrition. The condo behind him set for seduction, dimmed lights, soft music, dinner preparations underway. He'd even changed into the blue shirt I once said brought out his eyes. "Caroline," he said, voice warm with relief, "you came." "I said I would," I replied, stepping inside and taking in the luxury apartment purchased with my grandmother's money. Modern art on the walls, designer furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows with a stunning city view. An apartment designed to impress Emily, not me. I would have hated living here. "Wine?" he offered, already pouring to glasses. "Not yet," I said. "First, I want to see everything. Show me the place you chose instead of our future." His smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Of course, it's a great investment property. The market in this area is booming." He led me through the condo, pointing out features and amenities with the smooth patter of a salesman. Master suite with marble bathroom, guest room converted to a home office, chef's kitchen with top-of-the-line appliances. "And here's the second bedroom," he said, opening a door to a room that was completely empty except for a few unopened boxes. I was thinking, well, maybe someday, this could be a nursery. The calculated manipulation was breathtaking. I wondered if he'd cleared out Emily's clothes just hours before, preparing this performance. "It's impressive," I acknowledged as we returned to the living area. "You've created quite a life for yourself here." "For us," he corrected, stepping closer. "This could be our fresh start, Caroline." I accepted the wine glass he'd been holding, but didn't drink. "Tell me something, James. When exactly did you decide our marriage was worth saving? Was it when your parents discovered your affair? When Emily left? Or when you realized I might actually fight for what's rightfully mine?" His expression heightened almost imperceptibly. "I made a terrible mistake. I got caught up in something that wasn't real. Emily meant nothing." "That's not what your emails suggest," I replied calmly. "The ones where you discussed your future together. The ones where you talked about the investments you were making with your money." The glass in his hand wavered slightly. "What emails?" "The ones my financial forensic specialist recovered, along with records of every transaction you've made through Horizon Holdings, Westward Investments, and Summit Partners LLC, all three shell companies you created to hide the money you were stealing from me." His facade cracked. "Those accounts were investments for our future." "Our future?" I laughed. "James, you emptied my inheritance money specifically left for our children's education to buy a love nest for you and your mistress. You systematically stole from our joint accounts for over a year while telling me we couldn't afford to start a family." "I can explain." "Stop." I held up my hand. "There's nothing to explain. I know everything. The affairs, yes, plural. Emily wasn't the first, just the most serious. The embezzlement from our accounts. Even the fact that you're not actually staying with your parents like you claimed." His face drained of color. "How did you?" "Your parents and I talk daily now," I said. "They're helping me ensure that every penny you stole is returned." "Then my parents?" he snapped, mask finally slipping to reveal the anger beneath. "They'll support me in the end. Family loyalty matters to them." "Yes, it does," I agreed, "which is why they've made it clear they consider me family now, regardless of what happens with our marriage." He set down his glass hard enough that wine sloshed over the rim onto the pristine countertop. "What do you want, Caroline? Money? Is that it? Fine. I'll sign over the condo. We can split the assets. Just stop talking to my parents, stop digging into my finances." "What I want," I said calmly, "is everything you took from me. The inheritance, our joint savings, the future you stole when you decided to build a life with someone else using my grandmother's life savings." "You'll get the money," he said dismissively. "Though legally, as your husband." "As my husband," I interrupted, "you had a fiduciary duty not to defraud me, which is exactly what my attorneys will prove you did." "That's criminal fraud, James, not just grounds for divorce." The color drained from his face. "You wouldn't." "I already have," I replied, setting down my untouched wine. "The initial filing was yesterday. Criminal charges are being considered by the prosecutor's office as we speak. Your parents have provided statements about what you admitted to them about the money. They wouldn't testify against their own son," he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "They already have," I said softly, "because unlike you, they understand that family isn't about blind loyalty, it's about integrity and doing what's right." I moved toward the door but turned back for one last look at the man I'd once built my life around. "You know what the saddest part is, James? I would have given you anything. If you'd simply asked, been honest about wanting a different life, I would have found a way to let you go with dignity. Instead, you lied, stole, and betrayed everyone who loved you." His expression hardened. "You won't win this. I have connections, resources, Resources bought with my money, I reminded him. Money that's being traced and frozen as we speak. As for connections, you might be surprised how quickly they disappear when fraud charges are filed. I opened the door. Goodbye. Goodbye. James, my attorneys will be in touch with yours. I suggest you find a good one. In the elevator, I removed the recording device and took my first deep, free breath in months. Thomas was waiting when I reached the lobby. All done? He asked quietly. All done, I confirmed. Your car is waiting out front, he said. And Mrs. Harrington, for what it's worth, I think you're going to be just fine. As I stepped out into the evening air, I realized he was right. The road ahead would be difficult legal battles, financial recovery, emotional healing. But for the first time since discovering James's betrayal, I felt something unexpected. Hope. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Dinner is ready whenever you are, dear. Robert's made your favorite pasta. I smiled, thinking of the surrogate parents I'd found through this ordeal, the strength I'd discovered within myself, and the future that was once again mine to shape. Sometimes the family you choose proves stronger than the family you unmarry into. Sometimes the end of one dream makes space for something better. And sometimes when someone shows you who they truly are, the best revenge isn't confrontation, it's walking away toward a life they can no longer touch.